Sir, congratulations on this book. We are approaching the 25th anniversary of the Kargil War. So I think it would be in keeping with the spirit of things if I were to start with what your book tells us about Kargil. Now, it's very important to understand that you were Director General Military Operations at the time that this war actually erupts. And when you're talking to your Pakistani counterpart, you make this comment, which is captured in the book, where Pakistan is denying that their regulars are involved in this intrusion and the capture of Indian territory. And your counterpart tells you something about, "Main to bachcho ke saath busy hu," and you say, ironically, "Aapke bachche to hamare paas aaye hue hain," referring, of course, to the intrusion and the capture of Indian territory by Pakistani army regulars. But the main talking point, the main point of debate during Kargil was the instruction from the government that the line of control should not be crossed. And your chapter captures in great detail and relevant detail how this actually restricted the military response operationally. For example, when it came to deploying air power, in particular, because the air chief was not certain that a certain kind of deployment would not lead to the crossing of the line of control. You talk about the anxiety in the government at that time about the use of nuclear weapons by Pakistan. So let's take all of you back to Kargil. General Vij, I'll start with you. Your book talks about the policy of restraint as a national policy. The line of control would not be crossed. There was a national policy of restraint. Looking back at this very critical point in our life as a country, do you believe that that was a mistake, that mandate from the government, that instruction that the military cannot cross the line of control? How much did it hamper the military ops at an operational level?
Thank you, Barkha. This is a very good question. As a matter of fact, no strategist will ever go into the operation in the area in which he's already got the enemy troops sitting in great numbers. It is not done. There is an entire area of J&K which was open to us, where we could have opened the front and gone in far more easily and with much lesser casualties perhaps, and captured far more area. But the government had their own problem, because I think they had a reason, and that was because this operation started immediately in the wake of the nuclear weapons. They had just come in, and everybody was new to it. And our government, perhaps, I do not know, they didn't share it with us, but perhaps they were very much worried about this aspect, that we should not get drawn into a nuclear operation. Otherwise, I remember immediately after the operations, one of the former chiefs came into the ops room and he asked me this specific question which you are asking: why did you go into this area when the other areas available to you to start your operation? So that's the story. Given a chance, India wouldn't have gone into that area. But since our government had a major consideration in their mind, the army's job is also to see their difficulties into the point of view. Thank you.
Do you think it was a mistake looking back? I think 25 years later, we can ask that question. Maybe mistake is too simple a word, but how much did it hamper ops?
Yeah, it was difficult, because if you've seen those heights very closely, much closer than perhaps a lot of us, and you know what the heights are, and it was very difficult, no doubt about it. Starting from Tololing onwards, every height was difficult. But then that was the government's constraints. The army is also a job to help the government as much as possible. Whereas we had our problem, we did tell them, but they had their hands tied according to their own thinking.
General Hasnain, this idea of the nuclear threshold and almost as if that has in the past restricted India's responses. General Vij's book captures how that was a real concern. He believes that the government's response or instruction that you cannot cross the line of control, even though the army was preparing for a full-scale escalation. That preparation was there for a full-scale war. Do you believe, looking back, that there are lessons to learn from it? And those lessons were learned subsequently. How India responded, and General Vij also mentions this in his book, after, for example, Uri or Pulwama was very, very different. And we were not hemmed in by this threat of Pakistan having nuclear weapons. But looking back 25 years ago, do you believe that was the right decision, or do you believe it complicated operations enormously?
Barkha, firstly, good evening and Jai Hind, and my compliments to General Vij in particular for his new book. Wonderful, of course, reading this book. We are privileged to have got the early parts, the early copies of it. As to your question, very relevant. I think in 1999, just 1 year after the whole issue of overt nuclearization came overt, the whole thing, it was difficult for anyone to imagine what exactly will be a response. A lot of people considered it, now that Pakistan has declared overtly that it has got a weapon, they will use it at any time to their advantage. Over the years, in the last 25 years, we have seen that windows have emerged. There are lots of windows well below the threshold of a nuclear response, which have emerged, which can be exploited, which was done in 2016, which was done in 2019. But that, I suppose, happens with time, that you get that kind of experience. The distinct disadvantage we suffered in 1999 by taking the decision not to cross the line of control was felt at not even the operational, but so much at the tactical level. What people do not realize, perhaps, what the military leadership could not probably explain completely, was the fact that Kargil was at a limb. And Pakistan's response itself would have taken an umpteen amount of time to be able to react to any actions that we were taking. They have to go, they're on the exterior lines. They got to go swing all around. We were right there. We could do whatever we wished at that particular time. Our para-commandos, para-SF teams could have gone in, gone behind, crossing the line of control, made sure that the logistics bases were hit, made sure that no reinforcements were possible at all, and that would have made the task of our frontal assaults, virtual frontal assaults, which you have witnessed there, much simpler than what it was.
So in a way,
the casualties all came over that primarily.
In a way, you're suggesting that air power could have been used to cross the line of control, so that the retaking of Indian territory from the Pakistanis, who were sitting at the heights and therefore had that one advantage because they were sitting on our territory at the heights. You're saying
it's not about air power. It's not about air power alone. Air power was a very important element in it, no doubt. It would have made a huge difference if it was allowed to have crossed the line of control. I'm also talking about surface operations. You can ask General Shukla, he also knows that area very well. I'm sure he would agree with me for the fact that you had para-SF teams there. They could have gone across, they could have infiltrated across. These operations are tactical operations. This has to be conducted at company and platoon level. As you saw later on, this was all done at that level. And that would have made a huge difference. Just placing a few roadblocks, a few platoons on the other side of the line of control would have put an end to any possibility of this conflict going beyond. We would have then taken them in detail quite easily.
Very interesting. Let me bring in General Shukla at this point. Do you agree that actually not crossing the line of control was a tactical error? It cost India tactically. Obviously, in the end, it was Op Vijay, which we are going to commemorate. It's 25 years since the anniversary. International pressure worked. Pakistan was forced to retreat for a long time. It did not even acknowledge its own soldiers that it had sent in for this operation. We'll come to that. But when you look back, and General Vij's book has spoken very in a lot of detail about what happened in that time. He was on the hotline literally as Director General Military Ops to his counterpart in Pakistan. General Shukla, your take?
I think when you look back, the most polite thing you can say is that it was less than wise, excessively bashful and less than wise. And the proof of the pudding lies in Balakot. When we did Balakot, how did Pakistan react? But before that, Barkha, allow me to say, 2 sentences on the value of the book and on the salience of General Vij's persona. And I want to say this. that, in India's national security system, the position of the Chief of the Army Staff is unique. It's in influence, it outsizes all other actors, irrespective of rank. Why do I say this? In the MO Directorate, I used to see very closely the Chief's daily calendar. And he would be met by politicians, diplomats, domain specialists. Everybody was wanting to meet the Chief. So the Chief of the Army Staff in our system, his influence is outsized. The office is august, in many ways sacred. He upholds the covenant between soldiering and society. He has to take care of the nation's interests, as also the interests of the soldier. And therefore, the vision and the persona of the occupant of the office becomes very important. If the persona is skilled and visionary, it enhances the office. And if it is less than so, it diminishes the office. In this context, and the point which has been driven home by General Vij, when the metaphor he brings by way of title of the book, Alone in the Ring, when he says, Muhammad Ali, there were a lot of people to advise him from his corner about his moves and his decisions. But finally, it was Muhammad Ali who was alone in the ring. So the Chief of the Army Staff, at the end of the day, is alone in the ring. He's similarly disposed. He lays down the objectives, roadmap, sets the pace. The buck stops with him. In this, in this context, General Vijay's stint as chief was pretty high octane. It was packed with action and was very consequential in terms of decisions in a very challenging period of India's national security trajectory. And here I would just like to make one point. See, look at the challenges. You've spoken of them. Kargil, Parakram, Kukri, the anti-infiltration obstacle system, cold start. And yet he found the time to carry out one of the most, significant cadre reviews, the Ajay Singh Vikram Committee. He started it off, in a later phase we saw how the JCOs and other ranks have benefited from him. ECHS, AVES, 136 Army public schools, 5 million beneficiaries of the ECHS, 1 point of the Manekshaw Center. General Vij says in his book, when the chief used to address officers in Delhi, he did it from the rear corridor of the Defense Services Officers Institute. There was not a place. And we have this great building, its military grandeur and its ethos. And now what is it doing? Now that you have a place, last year you had the IPAC Chiefs Conference, the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs. You had the Chanakya Defense Dialogue. You are using it to shape national security conversations. So the final point was, India's pantheon of leadership has been rich and varied. You had thinkers, futurists, technologists like General Sundarji and so on. But I must say this, that in terms of action, delivery, and accomplishment, I think General NC Vij ranks right at the top. A close second would be General BC Joshi, but unfortunately he did not, live. And it has not been an easy saga. There have been objections from army commanders, the way he tackled the politicians, the bureaucrats. It was really a high-octane tenure, and the credit must go to General Vij for that. And the way he puts it in his book, absolutely frankly speaking truth to power, I really feel that this book must be read because it sketches the outline of what was a very eventful stint as the Chief of Army Staff. And now just a quick word on the nuclear overhang, if I may say so.
Please.
Here, once again, the only other chief, I may be wrong, General Hasnain can correct me, who seriously understood the nuclear domain was General Sundarji. Of late, chiefs have been hesitant to speak of the nuclear domain and have ceded it to other parts of the national security bureaucracy. And when the understanding is inadequate, it will lead to decisions of the kind that Kargil happened. I mean, Air Commander Jasjeet was arguing that if you used air power on your side of the LAC, it would be escalatory. It turns out when we struck Balakot, nothing happened. So these were, unnecessary rings we put around ourselves, and it definitely hampered our tactics and our operations, not only in Kargil, but also in Parakram. And so the last point is this. General Vij says that the nuclear doctrine must be tweaked. I say that because of the massive nuclear breakout that China is doing in terms of, postures, it's moving from NFU to launch and warning, tonnages, precisions, nuclear breakout as the Americans have described it. We really need to revisit our whole nuclear doctrine and strategy. And I would commend a wonderful piece by C. Raja Mohan a month back in the Indian Express. We really need to revisit our nuclear doctrine. We have been bashful, unnecessarily high, because nuclear and conventional operations, they converge greatly. So that's my view on.
Thank you for laying that out so passionately, and we'll come to the nuclear question in just in a moment. Now, I could, of course, out of just personal bias, spend the next 60 minutes talking about Kargil. It is so personal and deep to me, but we have a lot of issues to cover in the book. So I just asked General Vij one more sort of story that really comes out, and a lot of young people, of course, many of us know this story, but a lot of young people, General Vij, do not know the story of how the Indian Army buried the bodies of Pakistani soldiers at the height of war, when Pakistan would not take these bodies back, right? And you talk about this, and you talk about how many years later, Javed Akhtar is working on this film script of Laksh, and when you tell him this story, he says, "Yahi to fark hai India or Pakistan mein." Now, I think a lot of young people will not know this story, and you must tell it. The decision of the army, not just to dispose of the bodies of their adversary, but actually to treat them like soldiers in the battlefield, and even in the midst of the war, to perform the last rites and to bury those bodies, at icy heights. Please speak about that.
Barkha, thank you for the question. It is very important aspect, because in most of the war, what was being done is disposed of the bodies, both ours and the other side. But in this particular war, a lot of attention was given to it. And the government was also very keen. And of course, the army will always respect its soldiers. Our side, of course, each individual was, with a lot of respect, was buried. The bodies were sent back to their villages, where the entire village is collected, cities collected, and people got together in thousands of numbers to do this. But even the Pakistani soldier, because we respect the soldier, after all, there's no personal animosity between one person to another person. You are on a war as a nation, and because the nation, the requirement is that. So every soldier of Pakistan was given a lot of respect, and our Molvis, because we have mixed battalions, so we have a lot of Molvis available. They were brought in proper respect. With the ceremonial way, the bodies were buried. Later on, much later, when 5-6 years down the time, Javed Akhtar and with his son, I'm forgetting his name, a good director, they came.
Farhan.
Farhan. Yeah. So they came. I showed him the video, because I thought he will not believe it, because it's difficult to believe that one would be doing this. I showed him the video, and I said, "Look, this is the way we respected Pakistan soldiers, and this is the way they were treacherous with us, that even when Mr. Vajpayee was visiting Lahore, their troops were moving into Kargil." And
Yes.
the story of General Musharraf is, of course, well known. So when he heard this, and he speaks beautifully well, and he said, "यही तो फर्क है हमारे देश में, हमारे जवानों में और उनके जवानों में." And this line was repeated in the film. So one felt very good about it.
Absolutely. I think it captures, like nothing else, the ethos of what makes the Indian military so inspiring.